If someone had told me that one steaming cup of coffee could strip away decades of dignity and turn my daughter's kitchen into a battlefield, I might have stayed in bed that morning. But life has a way of catching you off guard, especially when you think you're safe. The late autumn sunlight poured through the large bay window in Lisa's kitchen, casting a warm glow on the white marble counters and the vase of chrysanthemums she'd picked up from the market. I was sitting at the breakfast table in my flannel pajamas, the blue plaid ones that always made me feel cozy. My hips still ached from surgery, so I cradled the warm mug between my hands, letting the heat seep into my fingers. Lisa had just brewed a fresh pot of coffee, dark roast, the way Travis liked it, almost bitter enough to bite. Lisa, my only daughter, stood at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone, blonde hair pulled into a tight ponytail, not a strand out of place. She was 45, with the kind of tailored clothes that made her look like she was always on her way to a business meeting. People said she had my eyes, but hers had a sharpness mine never carried. Travis, my son-in-law, was at the other end of the table, a man in his early 30s with the posture of someone who'd never done a day of hard work in his life. His brown hair was messy, but not in the charming way, more like he hadn't cared enough to comb it. He was scrolling through something on his laptop, one headphone dangling from his ear. It had been 2 months since I'd moved in with them after my hip replacement. Lisa had been the picture of kindness, at first bringing me tea, organizing my medications, even insisting she manage my bills so I could focus on healing. I'd thought it was love. I'd thought it was family. That morning, Travis looked up from his laptop and said, almost casually, "Ruth, can I borrow your credit card again? There's this gaming chair I've had my eye on. It's only a few thousand." I smiled politely but shook my head. "No, Travis. Not this time." He raised an eyebrow, like I'd just broken some unwritten agreement. Lisa didn't react right away. Instead, she let the silence settle in, thick and uncomfortable, like steam fogging up a mirror. Then she set her phone down, walked over, and stood in front of me. "You're being difficult again, Mom," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel. "It's not being difficult," I replied softly. "It's just my decision." That's when she did it. Without another word, she reached for my mug and tipped it straight into my lap. The coffee was scalding hot. I gasped, the shock stealing the breath from my chest, and pushed my chair back so quickly it scraped against the floor. The mug slipped from her hand, shattering into 3 large pieces on the tile. My pajama pants clung to my legs, the heat burning through to my skin. "Lisa!" My voice shook, more from disbelief than pain. She didn't flinch. "If you're going to be selfish, then maybe it's time you leave. We're not a charity, Mom. Either give Travis what he needs or find somewhere else to live." The word charity landed heavier than the coffee. My own daughter, who'd insisted I stay here to recover, now looking at me like I was a burden. I stood there dripping, the heat from the coffee fading but the sting in my heart only growing sharper. "A few $1,000s?" I said quietly. "For a toy? After everything?" Lisa crossed her arms. "It's not a big deal. You've got money. You've been sitting on it since Dad died. I don't know why you're making this hard." Then she set her phone down, walked over, and stood in front of me. "You're being difficult again, Mom," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel. "It's not being difficult," I replied softly. "It's just my decision." That's when she did it. Without another word, she reached for my mug and tipped it straight into my lap. The coffee was scalding hot. I gasped, the shock stealing the breath from my chest, and pushed my chair back so quickly it scraped against the floor. I realized, standing there in my soaked pajamas, that they hadn't been helping me. They'd been positioning themselves, each act of kindness a thread in a net they could pull tight whenever they pleased. Lisa's management wasn't care. It was control. I grabbed a paper towel from the counter, my hands trembling as I dabbed at my legs. Neither of them moved to help me. My hip ached from the sudden motion, my chest tight with humiliation. Lisa's voice cut through the silence. You either hand over the card or you're out by tonight. It wasn't a request, it was a threat. I looked down at the coffee, pooling around the broken pieces of the mug. One shard had landed near my foot, its painted daisies staring up at me. Something once beautiful, now useless. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I walked slowly, carefully to the sink, rinsed my hands under cold water, and turned off the tap. Then I spoke, my voice steady. I'll be gone before sunset. You either hand over the card or you're out by tonight. It wasn't a request. It was a threat. I looked down at the coffee, pooling around the broken pieces of the mug. One shard had landed near my foot, its painted daisies staring up at me. Something once beautiful, now useless. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I walked slowly, carefully to the sink, rinsed my hands under cold water, and turned off the tap. Then I spoke, my voice steady. I'll be gone before sunset. In the sanctuary of that small room, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the truth sink in. She wanted me gone. Not because she couldn't afford to keep me here, but because I was no longer useful to her. The walls of the room were lined with mementos, a framed picture of Lisa and me at her college graduation, a small quilt my late husband Cliff and I had bought at a county fair. Things that once reminded me of family now felt like exhibits from a life I no longer recognized. I thought about the months I'd been here, how Lisa had managed my medications, intercepted my mail, and handled my bank accounts so I wouldn't have to. How she'd told the neighbors I was too tired for visitors, when the truth was she'd never told me they came by. I had let her. I had let her help me right out of my independence. In that moment, a cold clarity settled over me. I wasn't her mother anymore. I was an asset, one she'd decided to liquidate. And that was the moment I decided I'd never give her the chance again. I didn't start packing right away. I just sat there, the damp fabric of my pajama pants clinging to my skin, my hands resting limp in my lap. Somewhere in the house, the television clicked on. Lisa's voice rose and fell casual now, like nothing had happened. That was always her way. The damage was done, so why dwell? But I couldn't pretend anymore. After a while, I reached for the phone on the nightstand. My fingers hovered over the contacts, before finally landing on a name I hadn't called in months. Gerald Matthews. Gerald had been my neighbor for nearly 20 years, back when Cliff and I lived in our own house. A retired lawyer, widowed, still the kind of man who held doors open and remembered birthdays. Cliff had always liked him, and over the years, Gerald became one of the few people I trusted without question. He picked up on the second ring. Ruth, everything all right? He hesitated. No, I said finally. Not really. There was a pause, the kind of pause that comes from someone who knows not to fill the silence too quickly. Tell me, he said. So I did. I told him about the coffee, about Lisa's ultimatum, about the months of managing that had quietly stripped me of every choice I once had. I told him about Travis's entitled smirk and the way neither of them had moved when I was scalded and shaking. And then I told him the part I had never told anyone. Gerald, I said, lowering my voice even though the door was shut. I'm not broke. What do you mean? I mean, they think I am. They think my only income is what's in the checking account Lisa monitors. But before Cliff died, we made investments. Long-term, quiet ones. And they've grown. Over the years, I kept the account separate. Completely separate. How much? I took a breath. 3 million. The line went still. Then I heard him exhale, slow. And they don't know? Not a word, I said. They've never seen a statement. I don't use it for day-to-day expenses. It was supposed to be for my independence, for when I needed to stand on my own again. And you think that time has come. I know it has. For the first time all day, I felt a flicker of warmth in my chest. Not from the coffee that sting had long faded, but from remembering that I wasn't as powerless as they believed. Lisa had spent months treating me like an old woman she could manage into submission. But she didn't know I'd been managing something too. Quietly, carefully, for years. "Ruth," Gerald said, his voice steady, "I can help you protect it. All of it. But you have to move fast, before she realizes you're leaving." "I'll be ready," I said. And I meant it. After we hung up, I finally stood and opened the small drawer in the nightstand. Tucked beneath an old Bible was a manila envelope, worn soft from years of being handled. Inside were the original investment documents, account numbers, and the last printed statement from the bank, dated nearly a decade ago. The balance back then had been impressive. Now, I knew it was more than enough to start over anywhere I wanted. In the sanctuary of that small room, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the truth sink in. She wanted me gone. Not because she couldn't afford to keep me here, but because I was no longer useful to her. The walls of the room were lined with mementos, a framed picture of Lisa and me at her college graduation, a small quilt my late husband Cliff and I had bought at a county fair. Things that once reminded me of family now felt like exhibits from a life I no longer recognized. Then I opened the closet and pulled down that suitcase from the top shelf. My hip protested as I stretched, but I gritted my teeth. Pain was nothing new, and this time it had a purpose. From the other side of the wall, I could hear Travis's laugh low, smug, followed by Lisa's clipped voice. I didn't linger to listen. I had my own plan to make. For years, I had let them believe they were in control because it was easier than fighting. Now, I realized, that was exactly what had given me the advantage. They'd underestimated me, and they were about to learn what a very bad idea that was. I stayed seated on the edge of the bed for a long time after that call with Gerald, letting the sound of my own heartbeat settle. The house smelled faintly of the coffee Lisa had poured on me, bitter, burnt, and it made my stomach twist. Somewhere down the hallway, Travis's laughter rose again, followed by the creak of the refrigerator door. The normalcy of it was surreal. How could they move on so easily when they'd just told me to leave my own daughter's home? But maybe that was the point. It wasn't my home anymore. I reached for the small wooden box on the dresser, the one Cliff had made for me on our 10th anniversary. Inside were little keepsakes: a dried rose from our wedding day, a photo strip from the county fair, and beneath those, a flash drive. I had tucked it away years ago, almost forgotten it was there. When I plugged it into the old laptop Lisa had let me keep in the guest room, the files popped up, scans of every important document from the hidden account. Contracts, quarterly summaries, dividend statements, all there, untouched. I clicked on the most recent file. The number on the screen made me inhale sharply, even though I'd expected it. $3,247,000. It wasn't just money. It was proof. Proof that I hadn't been drifting along helplessly for years. Proof that Cliff and I had built something lasting. Proof that no matter how much Lisa and Travis tried to make me small, I still had choices they couldn't take from me. Then I opened the closet and pulled down that suitcase from the top shelf. My hip protested as I stretched, but I gritted my teeth. Pain was nothing new, and this time, it had a purpose. From the other side of the wall, I could hear Travis's laugh low, smug, followed by Lisa's clipped voice. I didn't linger to listen. I had my own plan to make. For years, I had let them believe they were in control because it was easier than fighting. We'd been sitting in the den, and he'd said, "If something ever happens to me, Ruth, don't let anyone make you feel like you can't stand on your own. You've got more strength than you know, and you've got resources. Use them wisely." Back then, I'd thought he meant the small pension and life insurance. Now, I understood. He'd been talking about this, about keeping something that was mine, no matter what. I closed the laptop and slid the flash drive into the pocket of my cardigan. My fingers brushed the edge of the envelope with the original bank paperwork, still in my purse. The weight of it was comforting, a reminder that I wasn't walking into the unknown empty-handed. From the hallway, I heard Lisa's voice again, sharp now, followed by Travis muttering something I couldn't catch. It didn't matter. Whatever they were plotting or complaining about, it was no longer my concern. I stood and moved slowly around the room, taking in each item I'd brought with me when I moved in. The quilt Cliff and I had bought on a road trip to Vermont. The small lamp with the chipped ceramic base. The framed photo of me holding Lisa as a baby, her tiny hands gripping my blouse. That photo stopped me. I studied it for a long time, searching for some trace of the woman I used to be and the child I used to love without question. She had been mine, once, but somewhere along the years, she'd traded affection for advantage. I folded the quilt and set it gently into the suitcase, followed by the lamp base wrapped in a sweater. My movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic. This wasn't just packing, it was reclaiming. When I reached the nightstand again, I picked up the phone and called Gerald back. "I'll be leaving this evening," I told him. "If you can meet me, we can talk about setting up the trust you mentioned." I'll be there," he said without hesitation. "And Ruth, make sure you have every document you can get your hands on. Bank statements, Idaho-S, anything with your name on it. We'll lock it down before she even realizes it's gone." I smiled for the first time that day. "She'll realize it," I said. "But it'll be too late." When we hung up, I slipped the phone into my pocket and took one last look around the room. The sunlight had shifted, spilling across the bedspread in a way that made the fabric glow. It struck me then that I'd never see this room again after tonight. And surprisingly, the thought didn't hurt. I wasn't running away, I was stepping out. They thought I had nothing without them. They thought I needed their approval to survive. But I had something they couldn't touch. My independence, my will, and $3 million they didn't even know existed. And tonight, I was going to put it all to use. By late afternoon, the air in Lisa's house had shifted. Not in temperature, the thermostat was set to the same overly warm setting she always kept, but in something less tangible. The way footsteps sounded sharper on the hardwood. The way Lisa's voice carried from the kitchen, tight with some barely contained irritation. I was in the guest room, my suitcase open on the bed. The quilt was folded neatly inside, along with the lamp, the framed photo of Cliff and me, and a week's worth of clothes. I'd chosen each piece carefully, not just for necessity, but because I refused to leave behind anything that mattered to me. Lisa hadn't knocked all day. Not to check on me. Not to ask if I needed anything. She'd passed the doorway twice, her shadow stretching across the floor, but never stopped. That was fine. I didn't need her to. We'd been sitting in the den, and he'd said, "If something ever happens to me, Ruth, don't let anyone make you feel like you can't stand on your own. You've got more strength than you know, and you've got resources. Use them wisely." Back then, I'd thought he meant the small pension and life insurance. Now I understood. He'd been talking about this, about keeping something that was mine, no matter what. I closed the laptop and slid the flash drive into the pocket of my cardigan. Pain, I'd learned, is less frightening when you know it's temporary, when you know you're walking towards something better. From the kitchen, Travis's voice floated in. "She's really not going to give it to us, huh?" Lisa's reply was a low murmur, but I caught enough. "Don't worry, we'll figure something out." I didn't need to hear the rest. Their plans for my money were irrelevant now, and tonight, I was going to put it all to use. "Where are you going?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "You said I should leave," I replied evenly. "So I am." Travis, leaning against the counter, smirked. "Where to? Motel 6? I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. Lisa wiped her hands on a towel and took a step toward me. "Mom, let's not be dramatic. You don't have to storm out over a misunderstanding." I stopped in the doorway. A misunderstanding is forgetting to buy milk. Pouring scalding coffee on me and telling me to get out isn't a misunderstanding. Her mouth tightened. For a moment, She looked like she might say something else, but I turned and walked out before she could. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. Gerald's navy sedan was parked at the curb. He got out as soon as he saw me, his expression calm but his eyes scanning me as if to check I was truly all right. "You ready?" he asked, taking the suitcase from my hand before I could protest. "Yes," I said, and I meant it. He opened the passenger door, his hand hovering at my elbow as I slid in. "Careful with your hip," he murmured. That one simple kindness nearly undid me, not because it was extraordinary, but because it had been so long since someone had cared without expecting something in return. As he drove, the houses blurred past, each turn taking me farther from the place that had stopped being home the moment Lisa decided my worth was measured in dollars. Halfway across town, Gerald spoke. "So, the plan is to get your funds into a trust, separate from anything she could claim." I nodded. "And I want it done immediately. Tonight, if possible." He smiled faintly. "That's the Ruth I remember." We stopped first at his house. In his study lined with dark oak shelves and smelling faintly of leather and old paper, he set my documents out on the desk. "This is everything?" he asked. I nodded again. "Every statement, every ID, every proof of ownership." He studied the investment paperwork, letting out a low whistle. "3 million. No wonder you wanted this under wraps." "It's not about the number," I said. "It's about never having to depend on anyone who would use it against me." We worked for hours. Gerald made copies of everything, scanning them into encrypted files. He called a colleague who specialized in asset protection, putting the wheels in motion for a trust in my name alone. Every step we took felt like another lock, clicking into place not to shut me in, but to keep the wrong people out. By the time we were done, the clock on the wall read nearly 10. Gerald leaned back in his chair. "You've got a fresh account. The trust will be active within 48 hours, and not a cent of it can be touched without your approval. She'll never see it coming." I felt a strange mix of relief and grief. Relief that I was safe. Grief that it had come to this with my own daughter. "What's next?" I asked. "I think," he said, "you deserve a place that feels like yours. Not borrowed, not tolerated. Yours." "Where are you going?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "You said I should leave," I replied evenly. "So I am." Travis, leaning against the counter, smirked. "Where to? Motel 6? I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. Lisa wiped her hands on a towel and took a step toward me. "Mom, let's not be dramatic. You don't have to storm out over a misunderstanding." I stopped in the doorway. "A misunderstanding is forgetting to buy milk. We can arrange a short-term lease while the trust finalizes. Gives you breathing room." The words breathing room hit me harder than I expected. I realized I'd been holding my breath for months, maybe longer, tiptoeing through Lisa's house, measuring my words, shrinking to fit whatever version of me she preferred that day. We stepped inside the main building, greeted by a soft scent of lemon balm and freshly baked bread. The receptionist smiled warmly and offered tea, not paperwork. Sunlight spilled across a row of armchairs, and in the corner, 2 women were laughing over a puzzle. It was simple, ordinary, but it felt like something rare, a place where people could exist without being managed. "Think you could be happy here?" Gerald asked quietly. I ran my fingers along the smooth wood of the reception desk, feeling the grain under my skin. "I think," I said slowly, "I could be myself here." That afternoon, we filled out the initial forms. Nothing binding yet, just enough to hold the unit until my funds were moved. Gerald handled the details while I sat by the window, watching the koi in the pond outside. They moved lazily beneath the surface, unhurried, untouched. When we left, the air was cooler, the sun lower in the sky. Gerald drove me to a small boutique hotel across town, a quiet place with pale blue walls and soft linens, the kind of place you could sleep without keeping one ear open. He carried my suitcase in and set it on the bed. "I'll check in tomorrow," he said. "Once the trust is active, we'll get you moved in properly." I hesitated at the door. "Gerald, thank you. For not asking why I stayed so long, for just helping." He gave a small smile. "You don't have to explain, Ruth. Not to me." When he left, I sat on the bed in the quiet, the city hum faint through the window. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like a threat. It felt like possibility. I thought about Lisa then, about the look on her face when I told her I was leaving, the flicker of something that might have been surprise or calculation. She was probably in her kitchen right now, telling Travis that I'd be back, that I couldn't manage without them, that I'd come to my senses. But she was wrong. I wasn't coming back. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to move forward without her. That night, I opened the manila envelope one more time and spread the papers out on the desk. Each document felt like a key not to a door I'd been locked out of, but to one I was finally opening. I thought of Cliff again, his voice warm and certain. "Use what's yours, and make sure they can't take it." I intended to do exactly that. When I finally lay down, the pillow cool beneath my cheek, sleep came easily. And in my dreams, I wasn't standing in Lisa's kitchen anymore. I was walking through a sunlit garden, the sound of water in the distance, and no one was asking me for anything I didn't want to give. Tomorrow would be the start of something entirely mine. The first morning in the little hotel room was quiet, in a way I hadn't felt in years. No footsteps creaking down the hallway. No clatter of dishes in the sink. No sharp voices drifting from the kitchen. The silence wasn't heavy, it was clean, open, like a space waiting to be filled with something better. I woke early, though I didn't need to. Years of living under someone else's routine had trained me to be alert at the first sound of movement. But here, there was nothing to respond to. Just the steady hum of the heater, the faint smell of coffee from the lobby downstairs, and the muffled sound of a vacuum somewhere 2 floors below. I sat on the edge of the bed, cradling my tea. "We can arrange a short-term lease while the trust finalizes. Gives you breathing room." The words breathing room hit me harder than I expected. I realized I'd been holding my breath for months, maybe longer, tiptoeing through Lisa's house, measuring my words, shrinking to fit whatever version of me she preferred that day. We stepped inside the main building, greeted by a soft scent of lemon balm and freshly baked bread. The receptionist smiled warmly and offered tea, not paperwork. And her voice, Lisa's voice, too loud for the quiet hallway, too tight to be casual. I set my cup down and walked to the door, but didn't open it. "Lisa, this isn't a good time. You left without even talking to me," she shot back. "Is this how you treat family?" I breathed slowly, letting the quiet stretch. "You told me to leave, Lisa. I'm just doing what you asked." Her sigh came next, the one I knew too well, a sigh she used when I hesitated to sign something or questioned a sudden withdrawal, a mix of impatience and pity. "You're overreacting. Travis didn't mean anything by what he said. And the coffee was hot enough to burn," I said, sharper than I meant to. "And you didn't even look sorry." There was a pause, the kind where you could almost hear the other person recalculating. Then her tone shifted, more deliberate. "Ended?" Her voice, Lisa's voice, too loud for the quiet hallway, too tight to be casual. I set my cup down and walked to the door but didn't open it. "Lisa, this isn't a good time. You left without even talking to me," she shot back. "Is this how you treat family?" I breathed slowly, letting the quiet stretch. "You told me to leave, Lisa. I'm just doing what you asked." The time she'd accidentally transferred a few thousand from my account, swearing she meant to use hers. "Family doesn't treat me like a bank account, Lisa." Silence again. I pictured her standing there, eyes narrowed, jaw tight, that flicker of calculation crossing her face, the one I'd seen every time she realized I might say no. Then came the inevitable. "If you'd just give me your credit card, we could work all this out." I almost laughed, but it stayed trapped in my chest. That's exactly why I left. And I'm not coming back. Her voice pitched higher, brittle now. So you're just going to abandon your own daughter? I let the words hang, unanswered. Some conversations aren't worth finishing. Her footsteps retreated down the hall, sharp and quick. By the time Gerald arrived, I'd already tucked the encounter into a mental box labeled "Not My Problem." I told him the short version as we drove, and he shook his head. She was testing you, seeing if she could still pull you back in. She can't, I said simply. The retirement community was in full morning swing when we arrived. The front gardens were dotted with residents tending to late-season blooms, their hats casting shadows over faces, lined with years but softened by peace. A man in a straw hat tipped it in greeting as we passed. From somewhere near the courtyard came the sound of a piano, a lilting melody floating through the crisp air. Gerald showed me the library again, its walls lined with books and sunlight pouring in from tall windows. We wandered down a path to the koi pond, where orange and white fish glided under the surface like slow-moving flames. I was leaning over the railing, watching the ripples, when Gerald's voice changed. Don't look now, but I think you've got company. I turned and saw her, Lisa, at the gate, arms crossed, hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful, scanning the grounds until her eyes found mine. Travis stood behind her, leaning against the hood of their silver sedan, phone in hand, the universal picture of disinterest. But I knew better he was here, because she'd told him to be, because they both wanted something. Lisa started toward the entrance, but Doris, the security guard, stepped in her path. I'm here to see my mother, Lisa said, her voice clipped. Do you have an appointment? Doris asked evenly. No, but this is family, Lisa snapped, pointing toward the lobby. She's right there, Mom. Tell her it's fine. I stood behind the glass, hands resting lightly at my sides. I met her gaze but didn't move. Mom! She called again, louder now. The sharpness in her voice drew the attention of two residents walking by. In that moment, I remembered every version of this scene from the past. Her standing in a doorway, voice raised, holding out some crisis, like a bouquet of thorns, expecting me to take it in my bare hands. Each time, I had. Each time, I'd been cut. Not this time. Doris didn't flinch. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Lisa hesitated, looking from me to Doris, then back. Her shoulders were rigid, her purse strap twisted in her grip. The time she'd, accidentally, transferred a few thousand from my account, swearing she meant to use hers. Family doesn't treat me like a bank account, Lisa. Silence again. I pictured her standing there, eyes narrowed, jaw tight. That flicker of calculation crossing her face, the one I'd seen every time she realized I might say no. Then came the inevitable. If you'd just give me your credit card, we could work all this out. I almost laughed, but it stayed trapped in my chest. I felt the weight of her demands lift, cleanly and completely. She could yell, accuse, even follow me. But without my consent, she had no power left. And that was worth more than anything in any bank account. 2 mornings after the scene at the gate, Gerald called while I was still in my hotel robe, stirring honey into my tea. His tone was calm but clipped, the way he spoke when he had something urgent to say but didn't want to alarm me. She's filed a petition, Ruth, he said. She's claiming you're under undue influence from me, and that you can no longer make sound financial decisions. I set the spoon down slowly. The small sound of metal against china, feeling louder than it should. I'd expected a move like this eventually. Lisa had hinted at it before, in a half-joking way, as though she were just concerned about me. But hearing it in official terms was different. What exactly does that mean? It means she's going to try to gain control of your accounts. If the court believes her, she could become your financial guardian. The word guardian sat in my stomach like a stone. I thought of the way she'd hovered over me after my surgery, managing not just my recovery but every part of my life. right down to the groceries. A legal version of that was unthinkable. Within an hour, I was in Gerald's office, sitting across from Catherine Lee, the lawyer he trusted most. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, with neat hair and the kind of posture that made you feel she could win a case by simply standing up. She listened to my story from the very beginning. The surgery, the move into Lisa's home, the gradual erosion of my independence, the credit card demands, the coffee incident, and finally, the hidden account. "And she doesn't know about this trust?" Catherine asked. "Not a clue," I said. "That's good. But if we're going to win, we need to dismantle her claims completely. That means documentation, everything you can remember and prove." So began 3 of the most exhausting days I'd had in years. Gerald and I sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of bank statements, letters, and the worn envelopes where I kept receipts. I wrote out, in my neat block letters, every instance where Lisa had accessed my accounts without my permission, every temporary loan that vanished, every time she'd insisted on handling a bill for convenience, and somehow overcharged me. By the end of the first day, my wrist ached from writing, and my neck was stiff from leaning over the table. Gerald made tea, and I caught him studying me with a look that was equal parts concern and admiration. "You're meticulous," he said. "That's going to help us." On the third day, Catherine returned to collect the documents. She flipped through the notebook I'd filled, nodding occasionally. "This isn't just a defense," she said. "It's a counterattack. If she pushes too far, we could even pursue a restraining order." The week before the hearing was strange. On the surface, I was calm, walking the garden paths at the retirement community, visiting the library, talking with residents who already felt like neighbors. But under that calm was a quiet vigilance. I knew Lisa. When she felt cornered, she didn't retreat, she doubled down. The morning of the hearing, I dressed in a navy dress and soft gray cardigan, my hair pinned in a simple twist. I wanted to appear steady and clear-headed, the opposite of the confused woman Lisa's petition described. The courthouse had that familiar scent of coffee and floor polish, the echo of footsteps on polished tile. Lisa was already there with Travis, both dressed in muted colors, the image of solemnity. Her smile when she saw me was tight and brittle, like a photograph held too close to a flame. Inside the hearing room, her lawyer started first, describing me as vulnerable to manipulation and recently exhibiting erratic judgment. Gerald sat beside me, quiet but present, while Catherine took notes with a pen that never seemed to stop moving. I felt the weight of her demands lift, cleanly and completely. She could yell, accuse, even follow me. But without my consent, she had no power left. And that was worth more than anything in any bank account. 2 mornings after the scene at the gate, Gerald called while I was still in my hotel robe, stirring honey into my tea. His tone was calm but clipped, the way he spoke when he had something urgent to say but didn't want to alarm me. "She's filed a petition, Ruth," he said. I told the judge about the coffee incident, about the way Lisa had begun speaking for me in public, about the pressure to hand over my credit card just for emergencies. Lisa shifted in her chair, her knuckles white around the edge of the table. At one point, she leaned to whisper to her lawyer, who gave a small, helpless shrug. Travis stared at the floor, tapping one foot like he couldn't wait to be anywhere else. Finally, the judge asked me directly, "Mrs. Donovan, do you believe you are capable of managing your own affairs?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I've been doing it all my life. The only thing that's changed is that I've decided to protect what's mine from people who don't have my best interests at heart." There was a pause, the kind where the air feels heavier. Then the judge delivered the ruling. Lisa's petition was dismissed. The trust was recognized as valid and under my sole control, and she was barred from any further access to my accounts. Lisa didn't look at me as the judge left the bench. She gathered her bag with sharp movements, her mouth a thin line. Travis followed, muttering something under his breath. Outside the courthouse, The autumn air felt fresher than it had in weeks. Gerald handed me the official order. "She's done," he said simply. "Legally, she can't touch a cent." I held the paper for a long moment, letting the weight of it settle in my chest. This wasn't just a win in court, it was a closing of a door I'd kept open for too long. For the first time in years, I was untouchable. Stepping out of the courthouse that day felt like stepping into a different season of my life. I told the judge about the coffee incident, about the way Lisa had begun speaking for me in public, about the pressure to hand over my credit card just for emergencies. Lisa shifted in her chair, her knuckles white around the edge of the table. At one point, she leaned to whisper to her lawyer, who gave a small, helpless shrug. Travis stared at the floor, tapping one foot like he couldn't wait to be anywhere else. Finally, the judge asked me directly, "Mrs." His smile was wide, relieved. "Then we're celebrating. No arguments." We drove to a cafe just a few blocks away. It was a cozy place with large windows, and the tables near the front were bathed in warm afternoon light. The smell of fresh bread and coffee was comforting in a way I hadn't realized I needed. We ordered bowls of tomato soup and thick slices of buttered bread. "To freedom," Gerald said, lifting his mug. I clinked my cup against his, the sound small but satisfying. "To breathing again," I replied. The soup was hot and rich, the bread crusty and warm. I realized as I ate that it had been a long time since I'd sat at a table and eaten without a knot in my stomach, without someone watching, judging, or planning their next demand. After lunch, we drove through the gates of the retirement community. Doris, the security guard, waved as we passed. "Heard the news," she called. "Good for you, Ruth." Oh. Inside, the gardens were still holding on to the last colors of the season. Roses with frost-edged petals, chrysanthemums bright against the fading green, and the koi pond shimmering under the pale sun. I walked slowly along the paths, letting my hand brush over the tops of the flowers. I had visited these gardens before as a guest. Today, they felt like a promise. By the end of that week, I'd signed the paperwork to make the community my permanent home. My new apartment overlooked the gardens, with a small balcony just big enough for a chair and a little round table, the perfect spot for morning tea. The move itself was simple. Most of what I owned could fit into a few boxes. I left behind pieces of furniture that had never really been mine, items Lisa had picked out or insisted I should have. Instead, I brought the things that mattered. The quilt my mother had made, the teapot with bluebirds I'd bought years ago but had barely used, framed photographs that had been hidden in a drawer for too long. The first night in my new apartment, I sat on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, a cup of chamomile tea in my hands. The garden lights flickered on below, and somewhere in the distance, someone played a gentle jazz tune on a record player. I let the music drift through the night air and thought about the woman I had been just a few months ago. Careful, quiet, always calculating how to keep the peace. That woman had survived long enough to become the woman sitting here now. Lisa called twice in the first week. The first time, I let it go to voicemail. Her tone was measured, almost polite. "We should talk," she said, as though the courtroom had been a minor disagreement instead of a final severing. The second time, her message was shorter, clipped. "I hope you're happy with what you've done." I deleted both messages without listening twice. Life in the community began to take on a rhythm. I woke each morning to the sound of birds outside my window. I took morning walks along the pond, sometimes with Gerald, sometimes alone. I joined a small group in the library on Tuesdays, where we drank tea and discussed mystery novels. His smile was wide, relieved. "Then we're celebrating. No arguments." We drove to a cafe just a few blocks away. It was a cozy place with large windows, and the tables near the front were bathed in warm afternoon light. The smell of fresh bread and coffee was comforting in a way I hadn't realized I needed. We ordered bowls of tomato soup and thick slices of buttered bread. "To freedom," Gerald said, lifting his mug. I clinked my cup against his, the sound small but satisfying. When she left, I realized I just had a real conversation, not one laced with hidden motives or unspoken demands. The days stretched into weeks. I bought small things for my apartment: a sunflower yellow armchair for the corner by the window, a rug with deep red and gold patterns, candles that smelled of pine and cinnamon. Each item felt like a statement: I choose this for me. The first snow came in mid-December. I woke to find the garden blanketed in white, the koi pond rimmed with ice. I bundled into a scarf and coat and stepped outside, my breath clouding in the cold air. Doris waved from her post at the gate, her cheeks pink from the cold. "Morning, Ruth," she called. "Morning," I said, and meant it in a way I hadn't in years. Lisa didn't call again after those first two attempts. I didn't fool myself into thinking she had given up entirely. Lisa wasn't the type to let go of what she thought she was owed. But she couldn't touch my life anymore. Not legally, not financially. That knowledge was its own shield. On New Year's Eve, Gerald and I had dinner together at the cafe, where we'd celebrated my court victory. As the clock in the corner ticked toward midnight, he asked, "Do you regret it? Any of it, the fight, the mess?" I shook my head. "I regret waiting so long. I regret all the times I thought giving in was the same as keeping the peace. But this," I gestured to the simple table between us, the laughter we'd shared that evening, the quiet safety of my home waiting for me. "This is worth every step." When I returned to my apartment that night, I stepped out onto the balcony. The air was cold, but the lights from the garden made it glow softly. Somewhere below, a group of residents sang an old song, their voices warm against the winter night. Victory didn't come with trumpets or banners. It came with mornings where I could choose my own pace, afternoons filled with books and tea, evenings where the only voices I heard were ones I'd invited. And for me, that was more than enough. It had been nearly 3 months since the court ruling, and my life had found a rhythm I could not have imagined a year ago. I woke each morning to the sound of sparrows in the gardens, drank tea on my balcony while the mist still clung to the hedges, and walked the winding paths without looking over my shoulder. The days belonged to me again. On a bright February morning, the air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of camellias blooming near the courtyard. Margaret and I sat in the community cafe, a sunlit room with large windows overlooking the koi pond. She was telling me a funny story about Mr. Franklin, the neighbor who insisted on feeding breadcrumbs to the fish despite the clearly posted signs. We laughed, the kind of easy, unguarded laughter that feels like sunlight after a long winter. The bell above the cafe door chimed. I barely glanced up, expecting to see another neighbor shuffling in for their morning coffee. But then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in months, one that made the air seem suddenly thinner. "Mom." "Ah." I turned slowly, my hands still wrapped around my teacup. Lisa stood just inside the door, her coat hanging open, hair loose and slightly unkempt, as though she had dressed quickly and without care. There was a pale, almost drawn look to her face. Behind her, Travis lingered near the doorway, his posture restless. His eyes darted around the cafe, taking in the residents, the decor, the quiet order of the place. He looked out of place here, too impatient, too guarded. Margaret's smile faded. She glanced at me, reading the tension in my shoulders. Lisa took a few steps forward. "I'm not here to fight," she began, her voice low but steady. I need to talk to you." I set my cup down carefully. "What could we possibly have to talk about, Lisa?" She glanced back at Travis, then to me again. "It's about him, about us. Things have fallen apart." When she left, I realized I'd just had a real conversation, not one laced with hidden motives or unspoken demands. The days stretched into weeks. I bought small things for my apartment: a sunflower, yellow armchair for the corner by the window, a rug with deep red and gold patterns, candles that smelled of pine and cinnamon. Each item felt like a statement. I choose this for me. The first snow came in mid-December. I woke to find the garden blanketed in white, the koi pond rimmed with ice. Yet hearing it now, in this quiet cafe, it didn't bring the rush of relief or the swelling forgiveness I once thought it might. Instead, it felt like reading the last page of a book you'd already decided not to finish. I hear you, I said, and I hope you mean it. But Lisa, an apology doesn't erase what's been done. I built a life away from you for a reason. She swallowed, her gaze flickering toward the window. I know. I thought maybe we could talk. Maybe start over. The temptation was there, faint but familiar, the old reflex to leave the door open, to believe change could come easily. But I'd learned the hard way that keeping the door open often just invited the same storm back in. My life now is not something you can be part of, I said gently but firmly. Not because I hate you, but because I love my peace too much to risk it. Her lips pressed into a thin line. I saw the fight in her eyes, the instinct to argue, to negotiate. But she didn't. She simply nodded once, quickly, as if trying to keep control. Travis shifted, muttering under his breath. Told you this was a waste of time. I met his gaze. You're right. You shouldn't have come. Lisa turned slightly, looking around the cafe. Her eyes lingered on the residents, chatting quietly by the window, the barista steaming milk, the warm light that made everything here feel safe. There was a flicker of something regret, maybe envy, before she looked back at me. I just wanted to say it, she murmured, and then she turned and walked out. Travis followed, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders hunched. The bell above the door gave a soft chime, the sound hanging in the air like the last note of a song. For a moment, I just sat there, feeling the quiet settle back over the room. Margaret reached over, her hand warm on mine. Are you all right? I nodded slowly. Yes, more than all right. That evening, I took my tea out onto the balcony. The gardens below glowed under the lamplight, and the air was cool with the promise of spring. I thought about Lisa's face, the tremor in her voice, and the strange calm I'd felt while speaking to her. Closure, I realized, isn't about mending the past. It's about accepting it for what it was, and no longer needing it to be different. It's the quiet certainty that the chapter is finished, the ink dry, the book closed. The next morning, I walked to the koi pond. The fish swam lazily under the pale sun, and the water mirrored the bare branches overhead. Gerald joined me on the bench, his hands tucked into his coat pockets. She came by yesterday, I told him. He raised an eyebrow. What did she want? To say she was sorry, to see if I'd open the door again. And did you? I smiled faintly. Number and I won't. That door is closed, Gerald, for good. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. And what's on the other side of that door? I looked around at the gardens, at the buildings, at the people who passed with friendly nods. My life, my choice, my peace. For the first time, I knew those words weren't just something I was saying to convince myself. They were true, through and through. If there's one thing I've learned from this journey, it's that protecting your peace is not selfish, it's essential. For so many years, I believed that love meant giving, even when it hurt. I thought keeping the peace meant swallowing my words, letting others take more than they should. But the truth is, peace built on silence and fear is not peace at all. When I walked away from Lisa's house, I didn't know what would come next. I only knew that staying would cost me more than I was willing to pay. The path wasn't easy. There were days I questioned myself, nights I lay awake wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. But with every step, I found pieces of myself I'd forgotten. The woman who could make her own choices, who could enjoy her morning tea without dread, who could laugh without looking over her shoulder. To anyone listening who feels trapped by someone else's demands, whether it's a family member, a friend, or anyone who uses guilt as a leash, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to set boundaries. You are allowed to say no. Yet hearing it now, in this quiet cafe, it didn't bring the rush of relief or the swelling forgiveness I once thought it might. Instead, it felt like reading the last page of a book you'd already decided not to finish. "I hear you," I said, "and I hope you mean it. But Lisa, an apology doesn't erase what's been done. I built a life away from you for a reason." She swallowed, her gaze flickering toward the window. "I know. I thought maybe we could talk, maybe start over. If my story has touched you, reminded you of your own strength, or given you the courage to take your first step toward peace, please subscribe to this channel, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and join our community. We are here to remind each other that it's never too late to reclaim your voice, your dignity, and your freedom. Because at the end of the day, no matter where you are or what you've been through, you deserve to live a life that feels like yours. If my story has touched you, reminded you of your own strength, or given you the courage to take your first step toward peace, please subscribe to this channel, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and join our community. We are here to remind each other that it's never too late to reclaim your voice, your dignity, and your freedom. Because at the end of the day, no matter where you are or what you've been through, you deserve to live a life that feels like yours.